you have a 25-hour drive ahead of you. You have your best friend's belongings with you, and you're trying to think or figure out how you're going to tell her family what happened. You yourself don't have much answers. All you know was that sometime early in the morning, your friend Amber was stabbed 3 times. Yeah, we're your hosts, Kelsey and Adrian. Welcome to our new series where we want to highlight missing and murdered Diné relatives and indigenous peoples' voices, and highlighting the victims of these crimes that tend to get overlooked by mainstream media. Just a quick overview of the case. We are talking about Amber Webster. Um, so here are some of the details and a really just quick overview. Sometimes this is all what was written in the news articles about the case. So forgive me if I'm looking down to read. Um, December 2nd, 2018, around noon, there are police around a home to suite hotel room in Florence, Kentucky. A cleaning lady finds Amber's body in a room registered to a Jesse James. Kavana Dan, who was traveling and working with Amber, remembers seeing her last around 5 or 6 a.m. She walks to her friend's room to ask about getting something to eat. She can't find her and goes to the hotel desk and shows the staff of and shows the staff her friend's photo, and then is told to go wait in her room by police officers so they can talk to her. Security footage shows Jesse taking Amber back to his room. Jesse is found at a different location. He is arrested for behaviors and a list of other offenses that lead to connecting him to the hotel room and becoming the lead suspect of Amber's murder. What can we do to combat such senseless violence, and how many system failures need to happen before we as a society fix them? So Amber Webster was 26 years old, a Diné mother of 3 sons, one as young as 3 months old when this crime occurred. Amber and her friend Kavana Dan were traveling for work with a construction company. So for the first episode, we talked about Ashlyn Mike, because of the impact it had on the Navajo Nation, resulting in a major system upgrade with missing children, linking the Amber Alert to Navajo Nation. And I'm talking about this case specifically because of the proximity it has to me and my community. Amber is from my community, not in a way that she was Diné or Navajo, but in the way that she's from Cameron. I remember her in elementary school. She was a grade below me, and my cousin was really close friends with her. And so when this type of senseless crimes, and we'll just go over exactly how senseless this crime actually was, when it happens to your community, it feels different. This was literally someone I went to school with. It feels different in a way than when you see it happen on the news with other individuals in different communities. And so this case specifically is very touching, emotional for me. And so we'll go into the events leading up to the crime through Amber and Kavana's perspective, because it just shows you how random some of these crimes can be. Amber and her friend Kavana have moved into a suite to home hotel. Like when you're traveling for work, you get those nice little suites that are semi home like.
Mm-hmm.
They did contract work for construction, and they moved to Florence, Kentucky for I think a couple of months or a couple of weeks just to do their work. And I remember you, Adrian, you're talking about how you used to be a pipe fitter and would travel
Mhm.
for work like that.
Yeah, no, I can share a little bit about that industry. So, like what I noticed working, like doing that type of work, it's very male dominant. There are a few, you'll see female welders, you'll see a few female pipe fitters, a lot of fire watches. But the majority of people who work, in that, in like an industrial field or like in construction, it is very male dominant. And so a lot of women who do travel, they travel in pairs or they'll travel with their family. And a lot of Navajo families, the trade runs throughout. So it's like multi generational, and then everyone will travel together. And what I saw was a lot of people who had their wives along and their children, if they're very young, they would bring them along. Or like in the instance of myself and my brother, we worked with our dad and our uncles, and then some of our cousins also joined us every now and then. And so depending on the job, where it was, we did, sometimes we did what Amber and her friend did. We would get like a suite that had a little kitchenette, that way we could buy groceries and we don't have to eat out every night. We could like buy some groceries, buy drinks, make our lunches, take it with us. If we wanted to, we could cook in the evening. And there was this one hotel that we stayed in Long Beach because we were working at the Shell refinery. And there's a whole like Diné rigging crew staying there also. And so after work, we would all like hang out by the pool, and people would like crack open a beer, and the wives would already have food ready. So it was like awesome. We'd like all come home from work like in the morning, like our shift ended around 5 o'clock, so we were able to see the sun come up. So we would just like kick back like by the pool, have some drinks, eat some food, play around, like have fun, just kind of wind down, and then we'd all go to sleep. We'd sleep all day and then we work all night. Sometimes we go down to the beach because we were staying right there by the water. And so it was kind of nice like that. There was like a family community, and a lot of the families who are in the industry, they kind of know one another. But every now and then you would see an outlier, and sometimes it would just be like one or two people. And in that instance, it is a little, you have to be more careful just because you're on your own. And depending if you work like night shift or day shift can be, I mean, not day shift. Night shift can be a little dangerous because you're going to and from your parking. There's usually a parking space, and you get either bussed in or shuttled into the actual workspace. Moving around at night. I mean, there have been instances where, you know, there people will try to make inappropriate, unwanted advances at the young ladies that were working there, and the only thing you can do really is just like you have to stand up for yourself, and sometimes you have to like be ready to throw down and fight. You know what I mean? It's pretty rugged. um and if you don't have like protection in place, sometimes people will um approach you and bother you. That happened to me when I was working in that industry. I didn't like it, so my first opportunity to get out, I did. Um the the welding crew that I used to travel with, they told me, they were like, because I used to do all the trigonometry for the pipe fitters, and then we would, like do it on paper and then put it up. And so I was really good at math, so I would like do the math and everything, and then we would, put it together. I'd help with the prep work, and then we would we're installing these huge pipes. I mean, they're ranging from like 12 to like giant pipes that required cranes and stuff. Anyways, but they were telling me like you got to get out of here. You know what I mean? Like, this is not the industry for you. Um, they were like, there's other things that you can do, and we think that you should, because there were people that would make advances like that. Even like there was a supervisor once that did that, and they would stand up for me. All the guys on my crew protected me. When I was with my dad, of course he protected me. When I was with my brother, of course he protected me. But the fact that they had to says a lot about the environment that you're working in. You know what I mean? And you're not, you're there to work, you're there to make money, because you have this skill set that you want to apply and it pays well. um and so I think just that's a little bit I could share, like, to provide some of that context, because I think people might be wondering, like, well, why was she out working? Why was she in this industry? Why did she leave home if she only had a 3-month child? But a 3-month old child, but it's like, well, because sometimes you have to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is your bread and butter. This is what's going to pay your bills. This is what's going to allow you to be self sufficient and self reliant so you can provide for your kids, so that you can, you know, pay your rent, so that you can give them all the things that they need so they can live a healthy, balanced life, you know, because the money you make on the road is going to pay for their school clothes, it's going to pay for their food, it's going to pay for everything that they need. And you don't know what the situation is of individuals. Sometimes people, they have kids that need specialized health care, that need medicines and prescriptions. And so mothers are put in this position where they have to do this work, or they choose to do this work because it's something that they were given as a trade.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of women out there, especially on like from Diné that are very self-reliant. Um, the top welders I knew were female, and my dad used to always say that Diné women have a special finesse, you know, when it comes to their welding. He was like, they're special, they're different, you know, and so he liked to hire them. And so I think like there's a definite sense of pride I think that we feel as Diné women being able to um, utilize the knowledge that we're given, apply it, and then build a life for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you for adding some more context to what she does and the work she was doing out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you mentioned that some of the people on the job are the ones to look out for, but in this case, as we'll go through it, it wasn't that. Her and her friend were
Mm-hmm.
safe. They didn't have problems, as like anything mentioned, with anyone in their crew or who they were working with. So it was December 1st. The two go to their job at 3 p.m. and they get off at 4 a.m. And then, because they work the night shift. And then Amber and Kavana were hanging out until around 5 or 6 a.m., where Amber said she was going to go down to the fire pit at the hotel and, unwind, hang out, and whatever. Then the events of how and why or when Amber um, ended up in Jesse's hotel room, it's very unclear and unknown, because the only person alive to tell us the facts will be discovered that doesn't have a stable sense of reality.
Hmm.
So what he was thinking, how she ended up there, is still very unclear, just because of, we'll go on to it later, what his mental state was.
Hmm. So he wasn't somebody that she worked with, and he wasn't somebody that she knew.
You'll see later on
Mm-hmm.
how incredibly random this
Mm.
is. So Kavana wakes up and she goes to her friend's room. She's calling and texting her friend saying, "Hey, let's go get something to eat," because obviously it's like their breakfast time around noon because they worked until
Mm-hmm.
4 a.m. And she noticed Amber's not in her room. All her stuff's there, her purse, her keys, everything's still
Mm-hmm.
there. So then she goes down to the office, the front office, because she's worried, and there's a heavy police presence in the hotel because she didn't go back to her room, she went to Jesse's room.
Mm-hmm.
And so then she goes and she talks to the staff and she's like, "I'm missing my friend." And then she shows them a picture and they see the tattoo, one of Amber's tattoos. And then they say, "Go to your hotel room, stay there, an officer will talk to you later." And she just has this sinking feeling that something's wrong. And a cleaning lady found Amber's body in Jesse's room, and she was stabbed 3 times.
Oh my God.
Um, so I was saying again, Amber was a mother of 3 children, one of them only being 3 months old at the time. And I remember hearing about this, when this crime happened. Me and you were just starting Navajo Tea Time. We were
Mm-hmm.
talking about it during our first episode, the missing murdered Diné relatives, how many
Mm-hmm.
years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking back on it now, it hits differently realizing she had a 3-month old baby, because I was just starting back up work with a 2-year old, thinking, oh, now I'm ready to, let my baby, hang out with other people, hang out with her dad, and be apart from her. At two
Mhm.
years old, I could never imagine leaving my children at 3 months. And I
Mhm.
have the privilege of the work I do, which is this, recording, editing. I'm mostly at home. I have that privilege to stay with my children while they're growing up.
Mhm.
And it just hurts a little bit more.
It
Rereading
does.
this story and re-going over it again, because now I have an 18-month-old again and going over the story again. It's so sad how much you miss when you have to leave your children for work. And even now she's gone, that 3-month-old probably doesn't have any permanent memories of his mom. Just thinking about how her determination to work and get the money and do the things she needed to do to take care of her family was probably what was keeping her going. And then
Mhm.
just this random brutal attack out of nowhere.
Mhm.
And it's just so annoying. It just makes you so mad sometimes of like how senseless this really was. And I'll keep saying
Mhm.
that because I can't find a rhyme or reason why any of this happened to her. Some like people like, oh well, she was doing dangerous. The way people like to blame a victim when they end up in a
Mhm.
dangerous situation.
Mhm.
They did everything correct. They did everything right. The only thing she did was go down to the hotel fire pit, and who knows what conversation or what actions happened between then and she was murdered. We're gonna start going over the timeline of the investigation. So,
Okay.
while Kavana Dan was driving back 1,800 miles back home to Cameron with Amber's belongings and mentally preparing herself on how she's going to inform Amber's family, Amber's children, about
Mm.
what had just happened and the investigation just starting. So she has basically it's a 24-hour drive if you get no stops. So
Mhm.
probably 2-3 days it's going to take her to get back to Cameron. Um, she made some posts, asking other workers to wear purple, wear their helmets with purple on it, and the hashtag Justice for Amber was going around, and she wanted it really notable that Friday, December 7th, because that was the plan for her funeral
Mhm.
on December 7th. And so during their investigation, the Florence Police Department um, had heard that the suspect, the person who rented the hotel room, was detained at a cinema somewhere out some miles away. It was hard to tell if it was in the same city or exactly how far away he was from the hotel
Mhm.
because he got a cab and left his vehicle behind at the hotel.
Hmm.
And they were getting police calls about him because he didn't pay his cab fare. He was acting peculiar, causing a ruckus at the cinema, and that's when he was finally detained over there. And it was that evening that they had the names cross-checked because he first gave them a fake name, a
Mm.
couple of fake names, when they arrested him. And so when they finally got his real name, they realized it was the same as the person who checked the hotel room. And so the events leading up to her murder from Jesse's perspective, I'm going to kind of fly past them because they're important, but they're not really the focus. Jesse checked himself out of a behavioral center November 30th. He had stolen items from Walmart, one of them being the knife that was likely the murder weapon at this point. Um, so he had stolen that knife, and he went to a hotel room before then, before the Suite Hotel in Florence, but was kicked out for being lewd and creative and ruckus there towards staff and guests. So he was already kicked out of
Mhm.
one hotel room and then checked into this one where Amber and Kavana were staying.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, after the murder, he got in a cab that he didn't pay for at the end. So there was like the stolen services charge he was being charged with, and then also, having aggressive, erratic behavior at the cinema. Amber was stabbed 3 times, 2 times in the neck. One severed her carotid artery, and she was also stabbed under her right arm, straight through the rib, puncturing her lungs. A medical examiner determined that the knife found with James's other belongings, which was under his car at the hotel room, was a likely match for the wounds inflicted on Amber. Jesse at first denied murdering Amber, and then he was saying she left her in the room because she was saying she wanted to unalive herself, commit suicide.
Hmm.
But then later on, the interviewing officer, Cottingham, said he killed her. He meant it, and those were the words he used to describe his
Hmm.
confession. Jesse's family says they feel for Amber's family, you know, but they also feel that the mental health system failed Jesse. He should
Hmm.
not have been let out of the behavioral center he was at. He shouldn't have been on the streets. He was, causing trouble at one hotel room. He stole stuff from Walmart before he even ran into Amber.
Hmm.
And they were saying he doesn't need to be in prison, but he needs to be in a mental health facility. He is diagnosed with a mental illness, and he shouldn't have been on the streets without his medication. You know, someone should
Hmm.
have notified their family that he was out or something, but he shouldn't have been on. He shouldn't have been wandering around. So I guess just one of the conversation pieces of our script is like, how does that for you, Adrian, change how you feel about the case, knowing that Jesse had a mental illness?
I feel like I feel more compassion toward him because he was suffering too. I mean, it doesn't at all minimize what he did, though. You know, what he did was wrong, it was senseless, and it's really unfortunate that, like you said, the system failed. It didn't just fail him, it failed her. You know what I mean? And it fails for society as a whole because when these types of things happen, I think when these like cases kind of slip through the cracks and people are, it almost feels like they're being moved along by a system that doesn't genuinely want to help them or solve a problem. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, this is one less patient that we have to worry about. It almost feels like that. I don't know what those healthcare providers are feeling. I know that that is a really stressful career to have, to be dealing with, people who are suffering from mental health issues, and to do that day to day must be very exhausting. However, the circumstances of how he got out and how no one was notified, and that's what happens. It happens all the time, unfortunately. And there are a lot of people that are out on the street that should not be. They need help, but um the way our society is set up in America, our healthcare system is horrible. You know what I mean? And there really aren't any good solutions available right now. um, Healthcare, mental health care is expensive, and it's put on the shoulders of the citizens. And that's really unfortunate because I think that if the system was different, and if people, if say we had universal health care like some of our neighbors do, like in Canada, you know what I mean? It provides them more options to get the help they need at, and it's affordable, and it addresses issues before they become dire. You know what I mean? It addresses issues before they become super dangerous. Not saying that it's a perfect solution or a perfect situation, but it's definitely better than what we have here. Because I think that a lot of people get caught up in that, and that's why it's easier for them to just leave and get their drugs elsewhere because they can't afford prescription drugs. And so a lot of people start medicating and they start developing habits, and then sometimes people, they don't want to be burdensome either, so there's like, okay, I'm just going to go elsewhere. and then it spirals. So I don't know. I mean, I don't, that's not my area of expertise, but I feel like there's all these bigger issues, right? I think it is a problem with the overall system, and it sucks. And it is painful.
Mm-hmm. So, January 2021, 3 years after the murder of Amber Webster, Jesse James was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 35 years in prison. During the grand jury trial, the Indian movement of Kentucky and Indiana, that
Mm-hmm.
group was present in there for support of Amber. They had signs saying, justice for Amber, and trying to be there in support because her family, is 1,002 plus miles away and wasn't
Mm-hmm.
able to be there at the grand jury trial. So they were there for her, and I felt like that was a really comforting show of just indigenous people and just how, you know, all of these issues of, murdering, missing, murdered indigenous people is where there's actually a group in almost every state and every tribe trying
Mm-hmm.
to get this issue recognized and these stories out there, making sure these stories don't go without attention.
I want to ask you the same question you asked me. You know what I mean? What do you think about that? Like, does it make you feel any different, understanding that this person who did this horrible thing was also suffering from mental health issues?
I feel less anger at him and more anger at the society, and then just more anger on how really senseless it was. He was having a mental break, so we
Mm-hmm.
don't know how he got Amber to the room. He probably doesn't even know what he was thinking, if he's back on the medications he needs and thinking straight.
Mm-hmm.
Does he even remember his mental break
Mm-hmm.
that he had? Was it a mental break or was it discrimination? We don't know
Mm-hmm.
what's true and what's not true.
Yeah.
Reading some of the articles, one of the members from the Indian movement um, was saying that they wanted to add the charge of a hate crime,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know if I could completely agree with that because, like I said, we don't know his motives. He probably doesn't even fully understand his motives, and
Mm-hmm.
that's really difficult to put your anger towards that. um, you know,
Yeah.
it's just it sucks so much.
It
And
does. It does.
so like the impacts for the community of this event. Um, I think in some of the papers they were saying Cameron is less than 1,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's just accounting for people actually living in Cameron, not the family members. We have family all over the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't tell you how many family members I have. I don't even know some of the people I'm related to by name, but we have big families, and of course they move away for jobs. Some people travel for work, like Amber and her friend. Others people move to Phoenix, California,
Mm-hmm.
Albuquerque, even East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
So the people living here might be small, but our community is big, and we're all over the place. And
Yeah.
I think with this case of Amber and the case with Ashlyn, Mike, as mentioned before, it helps push more action of addressing the missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls in the U.S. I
Mm-hmm.
think shortly after this case, there was something brought to the Supreme Court, and I don't know honestly what these committees do. Like, they say, oh, yes, we're going to have a committee, we're going to address these issues, but I don't see
Mm-hmm.
what they do. Committees
Mm-hmm.
have a committee to committee. They get together and they talk. You know, uh, so sometimes it's great that it's getting attention. Sometimes it's great that the U.S. government created some sort of committee or legislation to address it. But obviously, with this case, there was so much more that created it. The mental health, you know, facilities, institutions, system. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be fixed. And I think that's because, like, even nowadays, people treat mental health as something to be ashamed of or a taboo where they're not open about. Like, I'm not saying you have to be completely open with any of your diagnosis of anything,
Mm-hmm.
but you break an arm, you go to the emergency room and get it fixed. Even if you like you have a cold or you have asthma, that's something constant and you have to constantly address and take medication for.
Mm-hmm.
People don't talk about it like it's a taboo. They're like, oh, you have asthma. Okay, so you have these limits with physical activity and you need an inhaler. But
Mm-hmm.
when you say, oh, I have this mental illness, they're like, oh no, let's not talk about that. Let's pretend you don't have it because it's shameful to have a mental illness, even though it's not your fault. Sometimes it's chemical, sometimes it's trauma responsive, but it
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be something that people are ashamed of. It should be a diagnosis that needs to be treated. And
Mm-hmm.
the US still has that stigma for mental health where, like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't talk about it, it's shameful, it's a taboo.
Hmm.
And I think we definitely need to move away from that.
I feel like we are though, you know. I remember when I was younger, like when I was growing up, God, it feels so far away. But you know, like when any kind of anything that appeared to be like neurodivergent was considered crazy. You know what I mean? And then like crazy was kind of kept out of sight. It was kept quiet. It was kept sometimes in extreme conditions locked up or sent away. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And um now I feel like more people are talking about mental illness or mental health in a way that never was before, where it's like we have mental health awareness month, and we also where people are telling their stories about their struggles, but also trying to destigmatize it
Mhm.
and providing vocabulary, right, language to talk about it, and also kind of bringing people together who feel like they fall within a specific group where they can kind of get support they need, or where like parents of children who might be um, having certain issues, there's resources for them now that really weren't there before. I mean, they're in the form of podcasts, there's like Facebook groups, you know what I mean? There's like all these different little, like, they're little, and it's really, I think, the people recognizing the need for this and trying to find a solution for it, because like again, the healthcare system isn't doing enough. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, our government is not doing enough to fund resources to address health in America, and that is really upsetting, and I feel like there's more that can be done. And I think if we're talking just solely though about Navajo, like Navajo Nation, um it would really take a big it would fall on the shoulders, I think, of our leadership. You know, our I'm talking about like our local leadership, like our chapter presidents. I'm talking about different board members that sit, you know, within our like our healthcare system, like on the healthcare system, or work within the healthcare system. I think this means our council delegates and our office of the president and vice president. It would fall on their shoulders to say, okay, this is something we are going to address, and this is how.
Mhm.
And they would allocate funding, and they would plan for to build infrastructure, and they would plan to roll out resources. And that isn't something I've seen a big push for. I have been privy to conversations about this within the context of being affiliated with the Diné Hatalthi Association, where the Hatalthi recognize it, see it, and are going to do something about it, and have been advocating for this type of holistic healing and holistic services to address mental health. Um, because they understand that in order to heal a person, you have to address the psychological, the emotional, the spiritual, and the physical. It can't just be like, you can't just give people a pill and expect the chemicals to do their job. You know what I mean? That doesn't address all the other issues. Um, and when it comes to, if we're going to talk about family dynamics, you know, what what is the problem that's pushing people away from their families? I mean, that's been a big conversation for a long time, and this is an economic question, I think. You know, what type of economic solutions can we introduce so that families don't have to be separated all the time? Because, for many years, I lived within a family where the men all left to travel and to work. You know what I mean? That's just the norm. That's what the men in the family did. And you have mothers who are back home taking care of their kids, and it's a single parent household for the majority of the year. You know what I mean? What solutions can we introduce to address that, where we don't have families being split up or people being put in the position where they have to be, away from their home to carry a job so that they can feed their families. You know what I mean? Like those are I think those are some of the bigger questions that we can ask ourselves, and we really need to think about, and if anything, those who are watching this, I hope that what they will take away is like, okay, what can we do? What position am I in? Or who do I know who's in a position to actually come up and introduce some of these solutions? Because I think everybody has the potential to come up with a wonderful solution
Mm-hmm.
and then enact that change that is necessary. Um, and maybe that's the conversation that we need to continue having.
Yeah.
Maybe it's, but how do we take it from beyond just a conversation, right, in a committee? I do know that some committees are formed to address cross jurisdictional issues, because when there's a situation like this where this happens outside of the jurisdiction, how can they work together? But also, what happens when, because Native people in America, we have tri citizenship, so it's like tribal, state, and federal, which is unique. And what happens when a crime is committed at the um, like a criminal crime, a federal crime, like murder, what does that look like, and who's going to get involved? Who's going to do the investigation, and who's going to,
Mm-hmm.
carry that out? Who's going to prosecute, and where does jurisdiction lie? So these committees are sometimes formed to address that, to talk about that with the states. How do the tribes interact with the states, and then how do they then interact with the federal government? Because of our status, it's unique, so, and a little more complicated. So I know that's one thing that some of the committees have been tasked with. Another is just advocacy, which is really important and big, because I think some people don't. Being able to work with epidemiologists to gather data is really important and expensive. And so having ownership of that data is another thing that committees talk about, where, okay, we're going to gather data, we're going to analyze it, we're going to use it to, generate reports and such that will inform legislation or will inform policy. How, who then is going to own that? And most times the tribes want to have sole ownership, right? Because that's confidential, sensitive information of people, and families and evidence, things like that, touchy subjects. And so they want to have sole ownership. So sometimes they have to kind of hash that out too, because it's never just a given,
Mm-hmm.
you know? This is something we have to kind of fight for. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely like it was a system failure here with him being out on the streets, not medicated or in the proper care, and like I keep saying, like it was senseless. Like you brought up all these different dangers with her job. It had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
It was a random person who got out of a mental health facility days before meeting her. They just happened to be in the
Mhm.
same hotel.
I know of a situation like that that's actually really close to home, where the person who perpetrated the crime, they were having hallucinations, and in their mind they perceived the other individual as a threat. It was a life threatening situation through their lens, and this person, because of what's going on in their head, believed it was their duty to attack and
Mm-hmm.
eliminate the threat. And that's what happens in extreme cases, like when people are experiencing like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or others, like kind of these more extreme disorders that cause hallucinations, specifically hallucinations. When it's at that level, then they can't really um, separate reality from what's being projected in their mind. And in that way, I think they're, like you said, they don't really know what they're doing. Like they know what they're doing, but there's like almost like a veil, you know what I mean, that shifts reality.
Mm-hmm.
So their perceived reality is drastically different than what is actually going on. Where, Amber, like, Amber could have just been, like you said, just trying to wind down from work, relax. I mean, was there camera footage?
There's just camera footage of her going to his room. They're not sure
Mm.
what led up
Mm-hmm.
to her going into his room or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. Who knows
Mm-hmm.
what he told her or what the conversation was that led to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, we might not know fully because
Yeah.
of his mental state.
But we can't. Yeah, like he could have said anything, he could have lured her. But also another thing too is like, and I don't know if, I mean, I know I mean, I don't know if I should even like, but allegedly, what if it was a hate crime? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if it was an alleged hate crime and this person, despite what their mental state was, perhaps they just saw an Indian. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And as we know, there's a long history of people seeing Indians and wanting to eradicate that Indian. It doesn't matter if they're male, female, young, or old. You know what I mean? There's a long history of that. And why that is something that's absolutely inconceivable to me. I cannot understand. I cannot put myself in that type of mindset where that hate is so deeply rooted and so irrational
Mm-hmm.
that someone would actually carry that out. And it happens all the time. And that's why MMIW, MMDR, MMIG is such a big issue, because there's all these cases of people seeing an Indian, targeting them, and attacking them and killing them just because they're Indian. It's like that makes zero sense to me. And of course, I'm biased because I'm Diné, but I can't imagine how anyone would want to hurt, harm, or eliminate someone as as beautiful and wonderful.
I mean, like just for the fact
I'm
of
just kidding.
being what they are, like doesn't
It's
matter what
crazy.
race, culture, religion. Just be like, I'm going to take you out of this world because of what you identify as is
It's
ridiculous.
insane. It makes no sense. It's like right now.
We're
Oh my
coming up
god.
to time, so we have two more cases planned that we want to talk about. Let us know how you're. I don't think enjoying is the right word. Let us know if you're appreciating these episodes and how we are highlighting true crime cases that are more focused on Native and Indigenous victims. If there's any cases you would like us to look into, leave them in the comments below. All the links that I got for this case, all the news articles, and some of the official court documents, I'll leave linked below so you guys can read your own. There's a couple of different. I just went over this really quickly because you saw I just kept crying. But there's a lot of more detail, a lot of more firsthand accounts from um, her friend. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. Um, I'm not good with names. So yeah, there's more accounts from her. There's more testimony from Jesse's family and how they feel that the mental system let him down and how
Mm-hmm.
truly sorry they are for what he did to Amber. And I felt like, because sometimes you get families that are like, oh no, not ours, not our son, not our, but they're like, we're
Mm-hmm.
sorry this happened and it shouldn't have happened and he shouldn't have been on the streets.
I think that says a lot, though, when a family can take accountability.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Will be another episode coming up next week. And thank
But
you.
also, I want to just say too, real quick, is that we're not doing this for views or likes. We're doing it because these are cases that need attention.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Though some of the individuals have been apprehended, this the what led up to these things happening, those are problems that are often societal, and those need to be addressed too. So it's like, I think, at least for me personally, I'm hoping that together we can really think deeply about what are the next steps that we need to take so that things like this can stop happening. Like, what do we need to do? You know what I mean? What conversations do we need to be having with our family or with our leadership? um, to keep these cases at the forefront, not for the sake of traumatizing the community of viewers, but to inform them and to not let these cases slip through the cracks where we just forget. Like, you know what I mean? Like, these were lives, these were our family members, these are our relatives who were lost, and what happened to them was so messed up. You know what I mean? It was like their lives were taken too early in horrible ways. And so that is not lost on us. And I think it's really important that we tell these stories, tell their stories, and then have a call to action. Like, okay, we need to do something about this, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, like, even if you just have a comment, it's like, oh, I feel like this type of system would be useful. Just having those ideas shared and put out there, you know, are helpful. Maybe the right people will see it, or you can collect.
I know for a fact that at least 3 council delegates watch Navajo Tea Time.
Oh
So
no.
if you have a comment, I know. I said, I was like, oh gosh. But that's why I sometimes take a serious turn because I'm like, hey, you know what? Or that's why sometimes when you're talking, I'm like, but the leadership, you know, or you know what I mean? Like, try to make it a little more serious and like just to kind of like, because I know they're watching and I know there's people um that work apart within these systems. So I'm hoping that, you know, maybe they'll have some solutions and some ideas. You know, they have to. And I really do think that we as a people are strong, smart, and creative, especially when we're working together. So
Mhm. Anything else?
no.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this
Mhm.
episode. And we'll see you again on the next one. Bye. Bye.
Bye.